into sport utility vehicles.
What's the story behind the secret Yale organization Skull and Bones, whose membership includes both the current and former Presidents Bush? In Secrets of the Tomb, Alexandra Robbins, a Yale graduate and secret society member, takes us into her alma mater to find out. This talk from the Yale University bookstore in New Haven, Connecticut, is about a half an hour.
Thanks. Thanks very much for coming. Can you hear me in the back? Can you hear me now? All right, this is not going to be easy. Okay. I have to say, this is sort of a weird situation for me. At my other book readings, sometimes after the event was over, a member of a secret society, it's happened with Manuscript Now and it's happened with Berzelius, has come up to me and talked about the book and admitted that they were members. But this is the first time I've done a reading where there are probably members of Skull and Bones in the audience among you right now, and there are probably members of my own secret society among you here as well. In fact, I think I recognize a few, although I'm not going to point them out for you. So I should say at the outset that if you feel that during my talk or during the question and answer period I'm not being quite as forthcoming as I might otherwise be if there weren't members of my secret society in the audience, email me at secretsofthetomb.com where we can have a private side conversation. A lot of people have asked me why I decided to try to investigate Skull and Bones, and the bottom line is really that Skull and Bones is an irresistible opportunity for a reporter looking for a challenge. Here you have a secret society, perhaps the, or at least one of the most infamous secret societies in the world. This is a society with setting. Its headquarters is a practically windowless building called the Tomb, the T, the Temple, or the Boodle, and it's located here at Yale. Skull and Bones also owns a private island. They've owned it since the turn of the 20th century. It's about 350 miles from New York City on the St. Lawrence River. This is also a story with characters. At any given time, there are about 800 living members of Skull and Bones. These members include people like George W. Bush, many other Bushes, Senator John Kerry, which could make the presidential election of 2004 particularly interesting if it becomes the first Bones versus Bones ballot. Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer David McCullough is a member of Skull and Bones, as was Averell Harriman, Henry Stimson, and even Steve Greenberg, the former deputy commissioner of Major League Baseball. All of these members know to keep quiet about the society's secrets. And in fact, in 2000, when George W. Bush was campaigning for president, the society actually sent a letter, reportedly, to all members reminding them that they had better keep quiet about the society's secrets, especially to members of the media. This is also a story with mystery. The society is fraught with rumors, secrets, and alleged conspiracies. Skull and Bones is said to operate a secret world government. It's rumored to be a wealthy landowner that guarantees its members power and financial security for life. And conspiracy theorists have managed to pin onto Skull and Bones everything from foreign policy disasters to one of my personal favorites, the horrors of the Dewey Decimal System. So with setting, characters, and mystery, I figured that Skull and Bones would be a fun, interesting, and difficult story on which to report. But of course, there was more to it than that. There always is. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about my reasons behind my decision to try to investigate Skull and Bones. First of all, when I was at Yale, I thought that secret societies were sort of fading. I thought they were on their way out, and that people my age just didn't care so much anymore. But about a year after I graduated, I heard a revealing story about a girl who was in my class, the class of 1998. This was a girl who was one of the prominent figures on campus. If there was a major activity going on, she had inevitably played some part in organizing it. And so people just assumed that when her senior year rolled around, when she was missing from parties, dining halls, and bars every Thursday and Sunday night, like the rest of the secret society members, that she had inevitably must have been tapped by Skull and Bones or another major secret society. Well, sometime before she graduated, probably about 3 or 4 weeks beforehand, her roommate found her on a Thursday night. She had not, in fact, been attending secret society meetings every Thursday and Sunday night. Instead, she was hiding in a weenie bin in the top floor of Sterling Memorial Library so that everybody would think that she had been tapped for a secret society because she was so mortified that she had not been as a prominent figure on campus. I thought that was kind of a telling story. Another reason I was intrigued by Skull and Bones was how widespread the rumors are and how readily people tend to accept them. Here's an anecdote from the book dealing with that. This actually happened to me about a year and a half ago when I visited Yale for an alumni convention. George Bush was one of the featured speakers that weekend, so I had decided that I was going to spend the afternoon staking out the Skull and Bones tomb, waiting for George Bush to come by. And if he walked by and tried to get into the tomb, I had it in my head that I was going to confront him. He never came by, but this sort of interesting scene happened, and this is an excerpt from the book. So here I am sitting in front of the tomb. 2 New Haven police officers pedal by on their bicycles, then circle back in front of the Skull and Bones tomb where they engage in a serious discussion about the secret society. I interrupt. "Do you know if George Bush has been here yet?" I ask. "We could tell you, but then we'd have to kill you," jokes one of the officers. "We haven't seen him," the other one says. "But he wouldn't come in the front door or the side door. He'd come in another entrance." "There aren't any other entrances," I point out. "Yes, there are," the police officer insists. He gestures to the surrounding buildings, Street Hall, LC, the art gallery. "It's all interconnected underneath these buildings," the officer says. "The tunnels lead everywhere. Bush could get in from practically anywhere on campus." I look up sharply. "You've been down there? How do you know that?" The police officer says to me, "I saw the movie." I pause incredulously to gauge whether the man is serious. He is. "There are only 2 entrances to this building. I have the floor plans," I tell him. "How did you get them?" the officer gapes. "Well, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you," I say. The other officer nearly falls off of his bike. "I'm writing a book about Skull and Bones," I add. "Good." The officer who saw the movie furrows his brow and shakes his head. "I can't wait for all this crazy shit to be exposed," he says. "I hear they have Geronimo's head in there." Geronimo's motherfucking head. Can that air on C-SPAN? I thought it was amazing and kind of funny that even the New Haven Police Department was pretty weirded out by Skull and Bones. But what was even more enticing than people insisting relentlessly on Skull and Bones' formidability was that I found out that at least some of the members of Skull and Bones themselves seem to believe that they possess an invincible sort of power. A couple of years ago, I wrote an article for the Atlantic Monthly about George W. Bush and Skull and Bones. After that article came out, I received a call at my office at the New Yorker from a man whom I knew to be a member of Skull and Bones. And this is an excerpt from the book about this conversation that we had. He scolded me for writing the article. Writing that article was not an ethical or honorable way to make a decent living in journalism, he condescended, and then asked me how much I had been paid for the story. When I refused to answer, he hung up. 15 minutes later, he called back. "I have just gotten off the phone with our people." "Your people?" I snickered. "Yes, our people. He told me that the society demanded to know where I got my information. I've never been in the tomb, and I did nothing illegal in the process of reporting this story," I replied. "Well, then you must have gotten something from one of us. Tell me whom you spoke to. We just want to talk to them," he said. I don't reveal my sources. Then he got angry. He screamed at me for a while about how dishonorable I was for writing that article. "A lot of people are very despondent over this," he yelled. 15 Yale juniors are very, very upset." I thanked him for telling me his concerns. "There are a lot of us at newspapers and at political journalism institutions across the country," he coldly hissed. "Good luck with your career," and he slammed down the phone. Another thing that interested me about Skull and Bones was whether it has retained any sort of influence in the 21st century as it did in the 20th. In the early 1900s, President, Supreme Court Chief Justice, and Bonesman William Howard Taft named at least two Bonesmen to his 11-man cabinet. In the mid-1900s, Secretary of War Henry Stimson surrounded himself with Bonesmen, whom he then put in charge of the deployment of the atomic bomb. In the late 1900s, George Bush, as vice president, held Skull and Bones reunions, and as president, appointed several Skull and Bones members to prestigious positions. And now, in 2002, one of the most fascinating and surprising things I discovered in the course of writing this book was that President George W. Bush, despite his constant disparagement of Yale, hasn't hesitated to turn to Skull and Bones himself, over and over and over again. Here's a passage from Secrets of the Tomb about Bush and his relationship with Yale. George W. Bush is unmistakably vocal about expressing his distance from and disdain for the elite Northeastern connections that shaped his family's political dynasty. After graduation in 1968, George W. Bush didn't return to Yale until 1991 for his father's honorary degree ceremony, and even then grumbled because he felt the university had taken way too long to confer the degree. George W. Bush's biting dismissals have been particularly aimed at Yale. He has sneered at the intellectual snobbery of his alma mater, a place that he has said epitomizes a certain East Coast attitude and an intellectual arrogance he finds unappealing. He has said that he wants to get away from the snobs, that people at Yale felt so intellectually superior and so righteous. When he finally agreed to speak at Yale in 2001, he used the podium as an opportunity to make fun of his Yale education. I don't think that Bush is the purebred Texan that he insists he is. I find Bush's dichotomy fascinating, and I think his divided persona is sort of neatly illustrated in where his twin daughters are at school. One, of course, is at the University of Texas, but the other one is here at Yale. So here's a little bit more about the more hidden Yale side of Bush. When in 1971, Bush was rejected from the University of Texas Law School, he did precisely the opposite of what one would expect from a man who says he has never relied on his elite Northeastern connections. He called a Bonesman. Years after other Bonesmen had given his father and his grandfather their first jobs out of college. Robert H. Gow, a Bonesman who was in the same class as Bush's cousin Ray Walker, told the Washington Post that his company wasn't looking for anybody at the time, but he hired Bush anyway. In 1977, when Bush formed his first company, an oil company he called Arbusto Energy Inc., Arbusto is Spanish for Bush, he once again sought the help of Skull and Bones. Relying on his Bones uncle Jonathan Bush, who ran the New York investment firm J. Bush & Company, Bush quickly lined up $565,000 from 28 investors. One of them put together $172,550, Bonesman William H. Draper. The wife of Federal Express CEO Frederick Smith, a Bonesman, chaired a $100,000 goal fundraiser for Bush in Tennessee. In October of 2000, Bonesman Stephen Adams, who owned Adams Outdoor Advertising Agency, spent $1 million on billboard ads for Bush. "I just contributed because I liked him," Adams explained to me. But when I asked, Adams admitted that he hasn't ever met Bush in person. Instead, he agreed that he simply had an affinity for all Bonesmen, just because they are members of Skull and Bones and, as he put it, shared that common experience. Loyal Bonesman Bush returned the favors. In 1984, he jetted to Nashville to accompany on a 7-city tour GOP Senate nominee and current Knoxville mayor Victor Ashe, Bones 1967. While on the tour, Bush spoke devotedly about his father to boost Ashe's GOP ties against an opponent who would later become much more familiar, Al Gore. Also like his father, George W. Bush has used his presidential power to reward his fellow Bonesmen. One of the first social gatherings, possibly the first, that George W. Bush had at the White House after his inauguration was a reunion of his 1968 Skull and Bones class. In November 2001, Bush appointed a member of Skull and Bones as general counsel of the new Federal Office of Homeland Security and a senior associate counsel to the President for National Security. Bonesman Frederick Smith was reportedly Bush's top choice for Secretary of Defense before he had to withdraw from consideration for health reasons. And Bush has also appointed many other members of Skull and Bones to prestigious positions in his administration, including an assistant attorney general and an advisor to the Secretary of Defense. I think that George W. Bush exemplifies the major paradox of Skull and Bones, which is that the society on one hand wants to be secret and invisible, but on the other hand it wants to flaunt its power and prestige. In his autobiography, George W. Bush mentions Skull and Bones only once. He writes, "My senior year, I joined Skull and Bones, a secret society. So secret, I can't say anything more." It's as if he wants to stamp it on his resume for us and then gloat that it's something that we aren't privileged enough to know anything more about. And finally, the aspect about Skull and Bones that I find most intriguing is the relationships between the myths and the realities of the society. The introduction to Skull and Bones, which is called The Legend of Skull and Bones, weaves many of the rumors I've heard and read about the society. Some of them are true, some aren't, but many of them are merely exaggerations of reality. For example, one of the most scandalous rumors of Skull and Bones, which some of you may have heard by now, is that during initiation, the neophytes must lie naked in a coffin and masturbate while recounting their entire sexual history to the rest of the members. This is a rumor that has become so prevalent that some foreign reporters I have seen have wondered seriously in print, with some consternation, whether our esteemed presidents Bush have engaged in that honorable activity. As you can read in the chapter on initiation, they probably didn't do that. However, sexual history is a crucial part of Skull and Bones. During the Yale Seniors Year in Skull and Bones, there are 15 Yale seniors, and they're known within the society as Knights. Each knight has an evening devoted to him. This probably goes from September to October. And during that evening, the knight must stand in front of a painting of a woman, which the society refers to as connubial bliss. They also refer to this activity as connubial bliss. And before 1991, when women were admitted, they referred to all women everywhere as connubial bliss. Anyway, they must stand in front of this painting, and there in front of the other 14 members, they really will recount their entire sexual history from the beginning to the end. And this is supposed to be an activity that takes anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. I apologize to the Yale men who are there, but I think sometimes the length of the activity depends on how much they feel like making up that evening. Another myth is that members of Skull and Bones must leave the room immediately if an outsider says either Skull and Bones or 322. This rumor caused reporters on the 1988 campaign trail of George Bush to wonder somewhat giddily whether what would happen if at a press conference one of them suddenly shouted Skull and Bones, if George Bush would suddenly hop up from behind the podium and go dashing out of the room. He wouldn't have, not in 1988, but that was a rule that was in effect until about the mid-20th century. In Secrets of the Tomb, I also, of course, explore some of the more sinister rumors about the secret society, such as whether the Bonesmen were in league with Hitler, whether they played any part in choreographing the Bay of Pigs invasion, and whether they really do have any relationship to a secret world government. But in any case, the public's constant shifting between reality and myth is really how Skull and Bones retains its mystique, even now, even in 21st century America. In Secrets of the Tomb, my aim was to illustrate the truth behind the secret society. And as the book begins, if this truth does not contain all of the conspiratorial elements that the Skull and Bones legend projects, it is perhaps all the more interesting for that fact. The story of Skull and Bones is not just the story of a remarkable secret society, but a remarkable society of secrets, some with basis in truth, some nothing but fog. Much of the way we understand the world of power involves myriad assumptions of connection and control, of cause and effect, and of coincidence that surely cannot be coincidence. Thank you very much for coming. Usually there are questions after I'm finished. I'm happy to answer them. Yes.
Hi. Oh, great. I have a question on behalf of a friend of mine. He was talking about the Ron Rosenbaum videotape and says that the smoking gun that you're all wet is because they've gotten an audio tape from another year with a similar parody initiation. Now, it just seems to me that the parody might be just as much of a tradition as the real initiation. Could you comment on this?
Let's see, what can I say about this? I can say that from what I know about secret society initiations, from what the more than 100 bonesmen with whom I spoke have told me, and these are men who I did trust and still do, that I do not believe that what was on that videotape is the Skull and Bones initiation. And there's more about it in the book. In fact, I have a chapter in the book about initiation where you can actually read from the Skull and Bones script, and I think I'll leave that answer there. Sure, yes?
I would like to ask you, Miss, if you dislike this group. Do you dislike them?
That's a blunt question. I wouldn't say I dislike the group. I treat them as a subject of an investigative journalistic exploration. I think that the problem with Skull and Bones is that it has people in positions of influence throughout the country. These members have included the President of the United States, Supreme Court Chief Justices, business tycoons, CIA officials, people running many aspects of American society. And I don't believe that these are people who reflect the rest of American life. I don't dislike the members of Skull and Bones personally. I think I dislike the purpose of the society, which is really to propel their own members to positions of prominence and then help other members get to those positions as well. Yes?
Well, that leads me to ask then, what are some of the criteria that the society makes in choosing the juniors to join the next year?
Is everybody hearing the questions okay? Okay, this question was about what are the criteria used to determine which juniors Skull and Bones will tap for membership. Historically, Skull and Bones would tap basically white, wealthy males that fell within the religious parameters that they dictated at the time. Now that's changed. Skull and Bones likes to say that it taps people who reflect Yale, and I think they've done a good job toward moving toward that, especially since 1991 when they finally agreed to let women in, and I can talk more about that if anybody's interested. I think the criteria now is basically success. Of course, legacy plays a part. It always has. Look at George W. Bush. I think the criteria now is really more that if they think that a member is prominent on campus in whatever aspect of campus life, if they think that a candidate is going to be successful later in life and bring that sort of honor and intrigue back onto the secret society and perpetuate the society's lore, I think that's probably the best determination.
My question is, if this society is so secretive and hush-hush, what was some of the motivations for all these people to come and speak to you and finally break their silence about the society?
Sure. The question was basically, if this is such a secret society, why they talk to me, which is an excellent question. I think they spoke to me for several reasons, and more than 100 spoke to me, but probably twice that many hung up on me. So they weren't all that pleased, all of them, to speak with me. But the ones that were, one reason is that they know that I went to Yale. They know that I could put into context what they were telling me in their interviews. This was also a time, I started about 3 years ago when that movie The Skulls came out. I don't know how many of you saw it, but it basically portrayed Skull and Bones as the most dastardly organization on the planet. Secret Society people thought it was a pretty funny movie, actually. But some members of Skull and Bones are tired of this sort of mysterious code of secrecy to which they're expected to adhere. They're tired of being associated with Nazis, being associated with malicious organizations, and some of them were very pleased that I was going to write a book to tell the truth about the secret societies, to show how they started at Yale, how they grew, why at Yale, and where they're going and where they've been. Some of them liked that very much. Others really were just exhausted with being associated with evil groups. And I think another reason they spoke with me is because as a member of a secret society myself, they felt that I was not going to paint the kind of picture of Skull and Bones that a conspiracy theorist might paint, or that a movie like The Skulls might paint as well. Yes?
Did you find any connections between Skull and Bones and other similar groups such as the Bohemian Grove?
The question is whether I discovered any connections between Skull and Bones and other secret groups such as Bohemian Grove. I do not believe that there are any direct organizational links between Skull and Bones and other secret groups. However, there are overlaps in members between Skull and Bones and, say, Bohemian Grove or the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission. For example, one very prominent member of Skull and Bones, Winston Lord, whom the Reagan-Bush administration appointed as an ambassador to China, he was also the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. So you will see some overlap, but I wouldn't stretch it as far to say that these groups work in sync.
This organization, the Skull and Bones, their location, they are at the virtual epicenter, geographical epicenter of the Yale campus. Yale, as a school, I've never gone to Yale. I went to a neighboring college. Yale has always been a school that primarily has produced businessmen and lawyers. These businessmen and lawyers go into not just small businesses, but big businesses and into government. It's that kind of school. It is basically a Masonic type of school. It has a Masonic type of emphasis. It has had a Masonic type of emphasis. This organization seems to be very much a Masonic type of organization. Is anything wrong with that? I mean, they give a certain emphasis to the college. They set the tone for the college. They have other organizations here, but this particular group seems to be at the epicenter in more ways than one. Is that so terrible?
Okay, the question, I think, is whether Skull and Bones is a bad thing, whether it's so terrible that they have all of these rituals. I think I'll just say I find it intriguing. Skull and Bones engages in rituals that have been the same rituals since 1832. That's partly how they lure their members, how they get them to stay with the society and participate in these sometimes strange rituals throughout the year, because the members know that this is something that George Bush did. This is something that William Howard Taft did. This is something that's been done every year in this organization since 1832. Does that reflect Yale? Yes. It does. Skull and Bones is really the epitome of Yale. Yale likes to live in the past. In fact, Yale has, instead of fixing broken windows, instead of replacing them, it likes to patch them sometimes so they look old. And in the early 1900s, when Yale was renovating the campus, it chose a particularly weathered quarry from which to construct its buildings so the campus would look older than it is. Yale, like Skull and Bones, is an institution stuck in the past. I think that Skull and Bones is from an Ivy League that really doesn't exist anymore. Did that start changing in 1991 when they admitted women? A little bit, but the rituals really haven't changed, and I don't believe they're going to. Any other questions?
Alexandra Robbins is a Yale graduate and co-author of the New York Times bestseller Quarter Life Crisis. Secrets of the Tomb is published by Little Brown, a division of the AOL Time Warner Book Group. Visit twbookmark.com for more information.
If you'd like a videotape copy of the programs you've been watching this weekend or any weekend on Book TV, call 1-877